We're going to continue the conversation on Sierra Leone's 2025 budget, which government says projected a total expenditure and borrowing of about 3.58 billion leones. This marks an increase from the estimated 27.3 billion expenditure in 2024. It's reflecting the government's commitment to advancing national development priorities. So this morning, to discuss the budget and its impacts on the economy, we have been joined in the studios by Dr. Sorie Koroma, who is Member of Parliament for the main opposition APC, and is the APC Parliamentary spokesperson. And similarly, so we're expecting to be joined by a member from the other end, I mean the Sierra Leone People's Party, whom we've extended an invite to discuss this all-sensitive issue. But nonetheless, Honorable Infa, it's a pleasure having you in our studios this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Good morning. I think you've listened keenly from the intro. It touches on the 2025 budget. Just the other day, I was following the debate in Parliament when one of your colleagues within the main opposition APC did consider this budget as a cush budget. It sounds hilarious, but on a very serious note, how dying is this, the economy of this country?
Well, I think more importantly, we have to look at a few things when you talk about the budget. One, how is government paying for this budget? A lot of debaters during the debate also, especially from the ruling side, have intimated that the budget is just a mere proposal. But we have to be realistic, meaning if government is proposing to do so and so, how is government going to fund the budget? And for so many years, as a nation, we've had a deficit in our budget, meaning we cannot even fund our budget, and which means we continue to borrow and borrow, which means domestic borrowing keeps going up, as well as external debt keeps going up. And government, as year in, year out, are struggling to pay the interest on these loans. To put things in perspective, let's talk about the internal debt or domestic borrowing. When government borrow a lot domestically, it means less money will be available in the commercial banks for the private investor or the private borrowers, which means interest rates will go up, which means the private sector will shrink. Secondly, when government have to pay these loans with high interest, it also means that government will have to find other ways of making money. Government will probably have to increase taxes. Government will probably have to take loans from external sources. So when government struggles to pay or manage its purse from the GDP, which is the gross domestic product, which is revenue mobilized, and as we speak, debt is at 45% of GDP, but debt went all the way up to 95% of GDP in 2022. So it tells you that all of what we mobilize will be spent on all what we owe. So it tells you that we are struggling as a nation. Now, a lot of speakers probably will come and tell you, like I was reading an article by somebody from IGR talking about the debasing of the GDP versus the debt. And also we've noticed a debasing of the currency, devaluing of the currency or renaming the currency, meaning 1 million leones is now 1,000 leones. So all of these are psychological maneuvers that governments do to create an impression as if we're doing well. So if we do not think that we have to be financially disciplined to handle our challenges financially or economically, and we try to do other things to make it look good, trust me, we'll pay for it down the road. And that is my worry at this point.
As you already mentioned, redenomination of the currency to make it look good. At some point in time, we've been informed by the former bank governor who says that the redenomination process, to some extent, will help to stabilize the country's economy. Since the redenomination of the loans, has it created a required impact economically?
Common sense will tell you that that will not happen. Because one, you have to print new currency. And printing currencies is not free. And inflation tells you that if you have more money chasing few goods, inflation will go up. That is why we had inflations in the teens before the reprinting of all this currency. Then up to last year, we have inflation going at up to 55%. So it tells you that the redenomination only compounded the problem, only added insult to injury. So certainly the redenomination, and we as an opposition advised against it, but the government was poised to do it and bent on doing it, and they did it. And we are suffering the consequences. Now, as we are rebasing now the GDP versus debt, which means GDP will be half of what it was. So it will look, or more than half of what it was, 2 times what it was. So it will look good. Eventually, we'll pay for it down the road because we'll be printing more currencies and we have to pay those debts, more money chasing few goods. And at the end of the day, if the government do not become fiscally disciplined, meaning government cut its expenditures to manage, one, the debts, the interest on the debt, to manage the revenue that is coming in, we will be really, really for a very, very long haul. Nations around the world that have done it. In the early 1900s, there is a good book by, a book that says, gold wants and future money. So gold is seen as the money that you can use now and a strong currency in the future. And he talked about how Germany in 1912 rebased their currency to compete against the dollar. But the rebasing of that currency almost took 1,000-fold, and the economy of Germany eventually collapsed because of rebasing. So rebasing or debasing is good for the short term, but in the long run, it will be consequential.
What are the good things in the 2025 budget?
That's a very good question. First of all, government is proposing to do things for feed salon. And of course, when you look at the big 5 game changers, talking about feeding Sierra Leone, human capital development, and creating more jobs, government will need to spend more money in government's medium-term development plans, which are plans set from now to 2029. So I think we will say those are good things about the budget because government needs to put its money where its mouth is. But the challenge is that other sectors also will eventually suffer at the expense of government putting money in other sectors. So, for example, in my debate, I talked about what do we do for social protection safety. And social protection safety, pretty much, we're talking about how do we protect the poor and the vulnerable. And we live in a country where people are more poor and even poorer. We live in a country wherein, by international standards, Sierra Leone and people in Sierra Leone have been considered to be multidimensionally poor, and that circumstances are also multidimensional that create or tends to create more poverty. So the question is, how do governments come in between to cushion? How do governments come in between to support the lives and livelihood of the ordinary Sierra Leonean? Governments have some policies through which money is given to social welfare, money is given to youth service, money is given to the NACIT, to labor, to see how they can diversify the portfolio of supporting the poor and vulnerable. But to me, I believe all of those funds need to be institutionalized for us to realize the effect. Because the tendency that some of these funds that are sent to those respective ministries or agencies are misused is great. And if we don't keep them in one bulk, government will not be able to monitor how those monies are spent. And in the long run, the people that we seek to protect will not benefit from all this protection. I was given an instance where I went to a restaurant and I saw a child probably in 9 and 10-year-old was begging outside the door of the restaurant. And I asked her, I said, what are you doing here? What you do now? What your mama was saying you now? And she said, I live with my aunt. And I said, your mama no say there? And she said, yes. And I said, you're supposed for they at school. You know, for they are the big. But it tells you that people are suffering. it tells you that people are desperate. And it tells you that government needs to do more. And the question is, how do government do it more? And I believe that by putting those funds in just portfolios and allowing people to just spend them as they will, government will not realize it and the people will not see it. And we see the suffering every day in the lives of the ordinary Sierra Leonean.
This budget is themed improving the well-being and quality of life of Sierra Leoneans. How realistic is same, taking into account a lot of proponents have said there is over-bloated wage bill, and we still see the continuous establishment of new agencies in country and what have you, and new employment opportunities have been provided, new positions have been provided. How realistic is same?
So that's what I'm saying. We see so many unintended consequences from government's actions. And that's why I also said that if government wants to paint a better present, then the future will be bleak. And that is why I believe that governments have to be more fiscally disciplined, meaning government have to reduce its pocket or reduce its spending. That's the simple, that would be the simplest prescription. Reduce your spending, then you will have more to deal with. So if you do not have the requisite resources to for example, help in social protection safety, you don't have the requisite resources to spend on healthcare, then of course you see the opposition telling you that what you propose to be trying to do with this budget is basically an irony, that you're seeking to protect the well-being and welfare of the Sierra Leoneans, but we are not seeing that. And the political commodities, which is rice and food, continue to go up. And if those items cannot be managed and people find it to be unreachable, then absolutely the ordinary man will not be happy with the government. And clearly, the ordinary man will think the government will continue to see the government as a government that is unpopular. The government will not like to hear this, but that is the truth. Because if you make my life better as an average Sierra Leonean, I'll love you more. Because look, in the United States, people voted for Donald Trump because they believe he will make the economy better. So with all the fancy speeches by the Democrats, it did not get the message. The message was, we want to see how we can go to the market and get a reasonable food to put on our table. And if that is not happening, the government will not be seeking the welfare and well-being of the people of this country.
Most of the laws that speaks to the reality in society are being okayed in the House of Parliament, where Honorable, Dr. Mfa also is a member. He sits there during this debate. What then is the role of Parliament?
Well, Parliament has so many roles.
And all of this.
Parliament have so many roles. Of course, integral of that is making those laws that affect the lives of ordinary Sierra Leoneans. But also, the government has a cabinet, and the central government comes with a proposal to Parliament. And most of these proposals by government do not require two-thirds. Most of these proposals by government pretty much tells me or tells us that this is the direction, these are our policies. We've been voted by the people, and this is what we want to see happen. But as an opposition, we give them an alternative. Say, if you say, I'll give penicillin, we say give Ampiclox. If you say, I'll give an injection, we say give an oral tablet. So, as an opposition, we have our own positions and believe this is what the trajectory or the directions it should go. But if government do not take those directions, and in a parliament that you for sure, in which the ruling government has more seats and more voice than the opposition, then it's clear that whatever we say there will only be in the message, but not the results of what comes out of parliament.
Honorable Mfa, your party made a grand exit under austerity. Do you see the need for the current government to declare austerity measures?
Clearly, and I always tell people that austerity cannot be a bad word. If I run my home and if I don't see my income sufficient enough to support my lifestyle, then I have to manage how I cut my coat. And that is what austerity pretty much means. But the ruling government now have used it as a negative connotation. And it is not, because governments have to be responsible with the people's money. All of these loans that government take are the money of the people. When this government exits, the loans will still be there, and those loans will be borne by the next government. So when government take those loans, they are not taking it on their personal self. They are taking it on behalf of the people of the country. So if they are not spending the people's money in that way, then the people should be asking these questions. So indeed, we are calling on them to declare an austerity. Or even if they're not declaring it, but their actions should demonstrate that they are really trying to do something to manage the resources. Otherwise, it will be tough.
It's now in Parliament, and Parliament has a decision to make. From the APC representation in Parliament, what's your position going forward on the decision to be made on this 2025 budget?
Well, Parliament cannot hold the budget. Parliament cannot make government come to a standstill, because if the budget does not go out, government will shut down. And if government shuts down, then nothing happens. But what Parliament can do is see how funds will be judiciously given to those sectors that need it. I mean, the elephant in the room is that even though we have these budget proposals, more often, sometimes governments cannot even fund the budget, meaning sectors, departments, ministries and agencies will go into quarters without receiving their subventions for those respective quarters. So meaning ministries, departments, and agencies cannot even have a first quarter subvention up to their third quarter, which means they are struggling. So if they are struggling, it means government is really biting more than they can chew. And if they're biting more than they can chew, then eventually government will choke.
Another contention there is the tax levied on imported rice.
That's true.
And the position on the part of the government is it's a way to encourage investment into our local farmers who do rice production. One or few of the government officials have also mentioned in public that it's to get especially those who import rice into the country to now use that money to fund farming, rice farming in country, so we could become self-sufficient. Is that justification enough for the taxes levied on imported rice?
I would say no, and I would say no. But we know all the dynamics that come into play. One, when you increase the taxes or the excise duty on rice, it will be paid by the final consumer. Simple. And when you increase those taxes, saying government needs to collect revenue so that government can fund the feed salon project, it means you're increasing the cost of living on the ordinary Sierra Leonean. It also tells us that governments do not have another source to pool the funds. Because the government have those sources to pool those funds, then government will not have to resort to increasing revenue through duty on rice, because they know the price of rice is high. And you cannot come and blame the importer saying they're increasing the price of rice and they're not seeing a reduction even though the subsidies are there. Why you cannot blame them is because you know you don't have a favorable exchange rate. If you don't have a favorable exchange rate, the importers will be spending more leones to get the few dollar to import the rice. So if you have to spend more to get that rice, you have to definitely recover your expenditure. So the importers are in a bind. They have to recover their funds so they can keep importing rice. So what government needs to do is to create that environment where the leones can get stronger. But how will the leones get stronger when we've gone out and printed more leones and we've devalued our currency? How will the leones get stronger when we keep increasing our debts? So it's a vicious cycle, and we don't see an end in sight.
Lastly, for my end is the fact that over time we've recently heard from government ministers, more so from the finance end, competing the fact that there are no new taxes in the 2025 budget. Does it make the situation much more better?
Well, it helps because it has not had fuel to the fire. But it doesn't mean that we've not done something wrong in 2024 that we have to deal with still and we have to deal with in the future. It doesn't mean and it doesn't change that. So for us, it should be a balancing equation. If you spend less, then your pressure will be less. We've asked government to increase this tax base, broaden their tax base. Of course, what they're trying to do and what they did in this finance bill is to see how people will be more responsible for their taxes, to see how penalties will be enforced when people don't pay. So pretty much that is a good government action because, I mean, consequences should be there for the actions. But nonetheless, if the 5% is still on rise, which it is, then it's not going to change the story. If government cannot create other ways of getting money, or government cannot reduce how they spend certain amount, then government will still be in that bind. But we always say a government that is more prone, or government that is more willing to answer to the international IMF, to the IMF or international multilateral institutions, that government will not be able to create the environment in which the people will be happy with them, because subsidies will be reduced. The multilateral institutions do not want you to subsidize at their own expense, meaning you will not be able to pay the debts that you owe them. So they want to see signs that you'll be able to pay them. And how do you show that? How do government demonstrate that? A government cannot demonstrate that in their policies, in terms of how they spend. Government will have to demonstrate that in their policies in mobilizing revenue. So that is why you will see an increment in taxes by government. So because they have to please the creditors that give them money to survive.
Thank you very much, Honorable Dr. Sorie Koroma, for your time this morning to be with us in the studio.
Thanks for having me.